Juan Carlos Gamarra, Ambassador of Peru to the United Kingdom, and continuing today with our cycle of podcasts on the World Heritage sites located in Peru. This time I'm pleased to be connected again with Dr. Luis Enrique López-Hurtado, coordinator of the cultural sector at the UNESCO Office in Peru. Enrique is an archaeologist graduated from the Catholic University of Peru and has a master's degree and a PhD in anthropology from the University of Pittsburgh. As a teacher and researcher, he has published a series of works on the process of building and expansion of the Inca Empire and on the religious syncretism during the first decades of the colonial period. This time, Enrique is going to explain to us the archaeological heritage that Peru has: Chavín, lines and geoglyphs of Nasca and Palpa, and finally, Chan Chan. Thank you very much, Enrique, for being with us again, and please start your talk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Certainly, the archaeological sites included in the World Heritage List of UNESCO in Peru, it's a very strong testimony of two aspects: the great diversity of cultural expressions in the country and the very important historical depth that this manifestation has. If we go one by one, we can have exceptional testimonies of complex civilizations at different times in the prehistory of the Peruvian country. If we start by Chavín de Huanta, for example, located in the highlands of Huaraz, in the northern highlands of Peru, and stunning scenario, a very impressive testimony of how a natural landscape is transformed in a cultural one. When we are talking about Chavín, we're talking about, around 1,000 years before Christ, 1,000 to 500 years before Christ. So we are talking about at least 2,500 years old. And we're talking about it at one of the first evidence that we have of the relationship between authority and religion, and how authority and religion codependent in order to organize a society. Chavín is the first evidence we have in Peruvian prehistory about what we archaeologists call a cultural horizon. Motifs and cultural elements that extended from a core site into almost all the Peruvian territory. And that's what we call the Chavin culture. What were the characteristics of the Chavin culture? Well, as I mentioned, this close relationship between political and religious power. This relationship is constant towards all Andean pre-Columbian society, of course, but it is particularly strong in Chavín. Chavín was built based on a number of underground galleries, crossed by canals flowing with water and elements, iconographic elements, made to inspire fear, terror. If you see the main iconographic elements of Chavín, we can see big fangs, terrorific eyes. We believe that this iconography, with the use of hallucinogenic plants, the San Pedro cactus, to be explicit, was part of the ideological manipulation of Chavín rulers in order to organize their society, to maintain control over societies, over their society. We believe that the ones to be initiated drank this hallucinogenic beverage made out of this cactus, and then they were introduced in these galleries. And you have on one side the sound of water flowing through the subterranean canals. Then you may find in these terrorific images of fangs and eccentric eyes. And that was a powerful element for convincing foreigner rulers, foreigner powerful people, that this was a very, very important center of power. That in the case of Chavín. Then, if we move to the other archaeological site, we're moving in time from the oldest to the newest. If we go to the other archaeological site, the Nazca Geoglyphs, also part of UNESCO World Heritage List, we're talking about a society developed around 500 years after Chavín. And here we have a different type of elements that speak about different types of social organization. There is a big debate about what the Nazca lines were and what their purpose was. But there's something that we are sure they were not. And they were not evidence of aliens or other kind of extraterrestrial elements or influence working into the intellectual achievements of the Nazca people. You know? They are very impressive for sure. Maybe agricultural calendars, maybe related to some type of ritual that highlighted community, inter-community relationships. But we have enough evidence as archaeologists and as scientists to be sure that this was the achievement of a pre-Columbian civilization without any extraterrestrial society, for say it in some way, you know. And believe it or not, this is one of the great challenges that as archaeologists we have in order to explain the Nazca lines, you know, because the message about extraterrestrials doing it is very powerful, you know, and if you cherry pick certain elements, you can put together a thread that can tell you an interesting story about that, but that's not science, you know. Science is based in order that you make hypotheses that are always that you contrast with data. And what data is telling us in the case of Nazca, it was that it was 100% an indigenous achievement. That the fact that many lines cross-cut themselves highlights that there were rituals that continue, that were done over a number of generations, and that probably they were part of rituals that stressed communality. And this is very interesting because in contrast to Chavín, that they have rituals that express power differences, the characteristic of the Nazca lines and the amount of people you need in order to do it express more like another type of society, maybe based on communality, maybe a society in the transition between what we call egalitarian societies to complex societies. And of course, based on the observation of the cosmos. Cosmology is the set of ideas that we as humans develop in order to make sense of the universe. And that's been present since always. I always like to tell my students, do you believe in cosmology? And they all say, no, of course not. And then I ask them, like, when good people die, where do they go? And they all say, oh, to heaven, you know? And that's cosmology. That's a significant we have made to the sky above us, you know, or to the underground. So those are the main elements to take into consideration at the moment of going to Nazca, that we are talking about an indigenous development that is certainly impressive, and it did highlight some type of community-bound ritual, maybe in this transition between egalitarian to more complex societies. And also, I would like to tell you that recent research done there by archaeologists from the Catholic University in Peru have discovered, using drones, more lines in the desert. So very soon, our knowledge about the Nazca lines is going to be improved thanks to that research. And finally, I would like to finish with Changchang. Changchang was the capital of a very, very rich and complex society that coexisted with the Incas that the Incas subdued not long before the European presence in the continent. Changchang was the capital of the Chimu Empire. And when we say empire, we're talking about a state-level society that is in a constant process of expansion. And we are talking about a society with much more complexity than Caral, Chavín, or Nazca. We're talking about societies with institutions, bureaucrats, complex lines of succession to achieve power, and an emphasis in the manipulation of space, overall of ritual space. And all of that is portrayed in Changchang. The whole mud city, and I think it's the biggest mud city, a city made out of mud bricks built in the ancient world. And there we have a number of palaces called citadels that were succeeding each other in a dynastic way. So once the ruling monarch died, he was buried in his citadel. He kept most of his richness in hands of his royal family, and the following ruler needed to build their own city, their own citadel, inside the Changchang complex. That system we call in anthropology split inheritance, in which the new ruler inherited the right to rule, but didn't inherit the richness of the political power. So they needed to go out and build it themselves. And maybe that was the reason behind this expansion process, that you as a new ruler, you inherit the power, but you didn't inherit the resources. So you need to go out there and get a fortune for yourself. And we believe the same system worked in the Inca Empire, and it was one of the same engines for the Inca Empire expansion, as well as the Chimu Empire expansion. At the end, we know because of history that the Incas finally conquered the Chimu, and it was one of their last steps in the progressive expansions towards most of the Andean region. One last point to highlight about Changchang is its privileged position beside the ocean in the district of Huanchaco in Trujillo, certainly one of the most beautiful landscapes I've been lucky to experience.
I was wondering, you've covered today three very different manifestations of our culture, the three of them on the coast, at different points of time. Is there any link between them at all?
That's a very good question. And believe me, we archaeologists have very tense debates about it. For answering that question, let's go to the newest to the oldest. By the moment of Chimu, all the Andean region know about each other. The Chimus know that there were these guys, the Incas, dangerously expanding their dominions. The Incas knew that the Chimu existed, were there, and they were their toughest rivals for sure. And it's a moment in the Andes in which there are many cultural traits that are shared. between states that are economic and political independent, but they all believe in ancestral veneration, for example, or they all have this system of split inheritance. If we go a little bit back in time to Nazca and Chavín, the predecessors of the Nazca, the Paracas, they did have contacts with the Chavín, for sure, because we have very similar iconographic elements in both cultures. The toughest part of the question is in the case of Caral. Because when we talk about Caral, Ruth Chadi talks about the Norte Chico culture, which is the valleys of Chillón, Supe, Patihuilca, Fortaleza, and so on. So in that case, maybe there were communities that were in touch with each other and have some kind of relationship, but it is also a moment when the Andes was less populated than in the times of the Chimú, for sure. So to answering your question, in the later times, yes, definitely, there were contacts between us. In the earlier times, it is still a matter of debate.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Fascinating. Once again, we thank you. The embassy thanks you for your help in trying to get more of our culture to be known here in the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and it was my very pleasure.